Welcome back to part 3 of the series on famous pirates. No introductions needed, but let's have a little conversation in the comments, shall we? Tell me your thoughts, and we can begin. First, we will be discussing Stede Bonnet, which some of you may have heard of, and then we will discuss our second pirate for the evening, Edward Lowe. So, relax, get comfortable, and we may begin. We begin with Stede Bonnet, born in 1688 and baptized on July 29th of the same year, the son of Edward and Sarah Bonnet, who owned over 400 acres of land southeast of Bridgetown, Barbados. Following his father's death in 1694, when he was only 6 years old, Bonnet inherited the estate and became one of the most affluent and respected members of Bridgetown society. That being said, it was a fairly small society. New world. It's new for a reason. Well, at least it's new for the people who showed up late. Now, in terms of his personal life, he married one Mary Allenby on November the 21st, 1709, and the couple had 4 children. There was 3 sons, one who unfortunately died before 1715, which was Allenby, Edward, and Stede Jr., but they also had a daughter named Mary. When Bonnet left to begin his pirate career, all of his surviving children were under the age of 5 years old. Now, writing in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, the historian Robert Ritchie suggests that Bonnet turned to piracy either to escape an unhappy marriage or to recapture the excitement of a more adventurous life. Although Bonnet served as a major in the Barbados militia, details of his military service are unclear. His tenure in the militia coincided with the War of Spanish Succession, but there is no documented evidence of his actual participation in combat. So, in the spring of 1717, Bonnet made the decision to embark on a career as a pirate, which of course in 1717 was as much of a career as anything else. Of course you could go down the privateering route, which is kind of state-sanctioned piracy, but it was honestly much easier just to go straight to being a pirate. Less paperwork. Well, he had no prior experience or understanding of life at sea, and that was the problem. But he was a quick learner. He commissioned a nearby shipyard to construct a sloop for him. Do remember, he was fairly well-to-do, as he inherited all that land off his father. And he gave the ship the name the Revenge. And this was atypical, by the way, as the majority of pirates acquired their ships by mutiny, boarding, or by repurposing a privateer vessel into a pirate ship. Bonnet, however, recruited a crew consisting of about 70 individuals. He depended on his quartermaster and officer for their expertise in sailing, which led to an issue with a lack of admiration from his crew. Remember, being led by a captain who didn't even know anything about sailing. Well, deviating from the customary practice, Bonnet provided his men with salaries instead of distributing shares of plunder, which was the common remuneration method among pirates. Following a period of being stationary at anchor for multiple days, during which he informed those who asked that he intended to utilize the Revenge for commerce with nearby islands. Bonnet left Carlisle Bay, Barbados, under the concealment of darkness. His inaugural voyage led him to the shoreline of the colony of Virginia, in close proximity to the entrance of Chesapeake Bay. There he seized and looted 4 ships and set fire to the Barbadian vessel Turbis in order to conceal information about his illicit activities from his place of origin. He navigated in a northerly direction towards New York City, utilizing 2 additional vessels and procuring maritime resources while liberating prisoners at Gardiner's Island. In August, he realizing that New York was simply not as lucrative for his hunting endeavors as originally thought, Bonnet decided to return to the Carolinas. It was there that he targeted 2 additional ships, a brigantine from Boston and a sloop from Barbados. He disassembled the brigantine, but took the cargo-laden Barbadian sloop to a secluded area in North Carolina to be used for the process of careening and repairing the Revenge. Following the utilization of the Barbadian sloop's rigging to tilt the Revenge, the vessel was disassembled to obtain timber, and the remaining parts were incinerated. In September, Bonnet navigated towards Nassau, the notorious haven for pirates located on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas. During his journey, he came across, engaged in combat with, and successfully evaded a Spanish warship. The Revenge, however, sustained severe damage, and Bonnet suffered critical injuries. A significant portion of the crew was either killed or wounded during the altercation. And no wonder. You see, the Spanish, they had the best equipped ships, all the best cannons, all the best ramming equipment, everything. Well, after arriving at Nassau all scratched up, Bonnet replaced his injured crew members and got to work on repairing his ship, upgrading the sloop's weaponry to a total of 12 guns. It was time to get serious. And during his time in Nassau, Bonnet encountered Captain Benjamin Hornigold and Blackbeard for the first time. No doubt you've heard of Blackbeard. And Benjamin Hornigold I covered in, I believe it was part 2 of the Famous Pirates videos. Now, Blackbeard and Bonnet formed a rather unexpected alliance, and they chose to set out together, with Blackbeard assuming control while Bonnet remained in his cabin, recuperating from his injuries. The vessel traveled in a northerly direction towards Delaware Bay, where they looted a total of 11 ships. On September the 29th, the Revenge, under the command of Blackbeard, seized the sloop Betty, which was carrying a valuable cargo of Madeira wine, and looted it. Captain Codd, whose merchant ship was captured on the 12th of October, depicted Bonnet as strolling around the ship's deck in his nightshirt, displaying a lack of authority, and still suffering greatly, limping around from his injuries. The Revenge subsequently seized and plundered the Spofford and Sea Nymph vessels as they departed from Philadelphia. On the 22nd of October, the Revenge halted and plundered the Robert and Good Intent, confiscating their provisions. On November 17th, Blackbeard seized control of the French slave vessel La Concorde, claiming it as his own, and renaming it to Queen Anne's Revenge, which is a pretty cool name for a pirate ship, you must admit. Now, following the 19th of December, Bonnet and Blackbeard finally went their separate ways. Bonnet navigated through the waters of the Western Caribbean. On March 28, 1718, he came across the 400-ton commercial ship Protestant Caesar near Honduras. The ship managed to elude him, and his exasperated crew began to grow restless. Shortly after their meeting at Turnef Atoll, Bonnet's men abandoned him to join up with Blackbeard. Blackbeard summoned Bonnet onto the ship and effectively detained him, insinuating that, as a gentleman, of course, Bonnet would choose a life of idleness rather than one of authority. Blackbeard appointed a subordinate named Richards to take charge of the Revenge. Well, Bonnet, of course, was quite taken back by the betrayal of his colleague, and he found himself as a captive on Blackbeard's vessel, the Queen Anne's Revenge. He disclosed to a select group of faithful crew members his intention to renounce his illicit activities, provided he could banish himself to either Spain or Portugal. Well, under the leadership of Richards, the Revenge successfully seized control of Jamaican sloop named the Adventure, which was commanded by David Heriot. Now, Heriot then chose to align himself with the pirates. I'm sure the alternatives were less pleasant. Bonnet joined Blackbeard to South Carolina, where they used 4 ships to block the harbor of Charlestown in the late spring, a rather large settlement. Seeking a location to rest and repair his ships, Blackbeard traveled north to Topsail Island, where the Queen Anne's Revenge became stranded and was subsequently lost in June of the same year. Amidst the growing disagreement among the pirates, Blackbeard granted Bonnet the authority to lead the Revenge once more. After leaving the remaining ships at Topsail Island, also known as Topsail Inlet, Blackbeard and Bonnet disembarked and travelled to Bath. Not Bath in England, but this is the Bath that was the then capital of North Carolina. Upon arrival, both individuals willingly received pardons from the Governor Charles Eden in accordance with the Act of Grace that was sent out by King George, ostensibly with the stipulation that they permanently abandon their involvement in piracy. You see, the problem was so bad in those times that they would effectively offer people clemency. Say to them, "Look, we're not going to throw you in prison. We just want you to stop. Just stop being a pirate. Don't do it again, and all is forgiven." And a lot of pirates took up the offer. It's a pretty good deal. After that, especially if you've buried your treasure somewhere, perhaps gained some wealth for yourself already, go and retire to some plantation somewhere. Well, Blackbeard discreetly returned to Topsail Island, but Bonnet remained in Bath to obtain a clearance in order to sail the Revenge to Denmark's Caribbean island off St. Thomas. You see, his intention was to acquire a letter of marque and engage in privateering activities against the Spanish shipping islands. Eden authorized Bonnet with this level of access. And by the way, don't get confused. The Revenge is a different ship to the Queen Anne's Revenge. Do remember. Now, upon Bonnet's return to topsail, he discovered that Blackbeard had deliberately sunk many of the pirate ships, seized all of the stolen treasures, and plundered the Revenge and two other ships from the squadron, depriving them of a significant portion of their provisions before departing the area. Subsequently, Bonnet rescued a group of 17 pirates who had been stranded on a sandbar by Blackbeard as a consequence of their discerning views on his strategies. Bonnet initiated the process of replenishing the severely damaged Revenge by utilizing bumboats to transport food from the shore onto the ship. Bonnet received one of these reports, which informed him that Blackbeard was anchored at Ocracoke Inlet, with a mere 18 pirates to help him. With a desire to seek retribution against Blackbeard, Bonnet embarked on a journey towards Ocracoke. However, he arrived only several hours after Blackbeard had left. Too bad. Bonnet pursued the other pirate, but was unsuccessful in apprehending him. Despite Bonnet's persistent aspirations to reach St. Thomas and obtain his letter of marque, Blackbeard had pilfered the provisions and resources necessary for the survival of Bonnet and his crew. So, in an effort to maintain his pardon, while resuming his pirate activities under the radar, Bonnet assumed the pseudonym Captain Thomas and renamed his ship to the Royal James. He named his sloop to the Royal James presumably as a tribute to James Francis Edward Stuart, that was the son of the dethroned James II of England. At that time, James Stuart was planning to reclaim the English monarchy from George I of Great Britain. Now, Bonnet attempted to conceal his resumption of piracy by feigning involvement in commerce, while plundering ships in the meantime. Shortly thereafter, Bonnet abandoned the pretense of trading and simply returned to engaging in piracy without maintaining any form of disguise, spurred on by the encouragement of his crew. While sailing north into Delaware Bay, Bonnet plundered 5 ships in July, bringing his total to 11 since he had been granted his pardon. He captured multiple individuals, a portion of whom he chose to become members of his pirate gang. Once again, it's either that or marooning. Although Bonnet released the majority of his plundered prizes, he did maintain possession of the final 2 sloops he seized. This was more a practicality issue. Simply don't have enough men to crew all of those ships. So you may as well just let a few go or just burn them on the shore. Well, while conducting these activities, the Royal James had started to have significant leakage and required repairs. Bonnet navigated the vessel to Cape Fear River, a notorious gathering place for pirates, in order to carry out the necessary repairs that were projected to take around 2 months to complete. Soon after, a small boat entered the river and was seized. Bonnet dismantled it in order to assist in the restoration of the Royal James, repurposing its parts and timber. And so, the task of careening was carried out, either whole or partially, by the prisoners whom Bonnet had apprehended. Bonnet coerced at least one individual by threatening to abandon him on a desert island if he did not collaborate with the enslaved individuals to restore the Royal James. but Bonnet himself chose to stay in Cape Fear River with the intention of enduring the hurricane season, which is, in that location, not a season you want to have to endure. Now, late August, reports had reached Charlestown that a pirate ship was anchored in the Cape Fear River. Robert Johnson, the governor of South Carolina, granted Colonel William Rhett the authority to command a naval expedition against the pirates. Now, Robert Johnson had believed that North Carolina was actually colluding with the pirates and would not take a single thing to confront them independently. Following an initial setback caused by the unexpected presence of another pirate ship at Charlestown, Rhett successfully reached the entrance of the Cape Fear River on the 26th of September. He was accompanied by 2 sloops, the Henry and the Sea Nymph, each armed with 8 guns and a contingent of 130 well-trained militia soldiers. Bonnet dispatched 3 canoes towards Rhett's vessels, and was perturbed to discover that they were indeed armed warships, not just a transport ship full of nice little goodies that could be plundered. Nope, these were all geared up with as much pirate murdering equipment money could buy. Well, Bonnet intended to embark on a naval expedition at daybreak, accompanied by his crew of 45, in order to navigate through the open waters. In addition, he composed a letter addressed to Johnson, in which he made a menacing declaration to set fire to all the vessels located in the Charlestown harbor. On the morning of September 27th, 1718, Bonnet embarked towards Rhett's fleet, and all 3 sloops commenced firing, marking the beginning of the Battle of Cape Fear River. Rhett navigated his 2 vessels towards the Royal James, compelling the pirate to remain in the shallow depths of the river. And the Royal James quickly ran aground, and the South Carolinian warships also ran aground during their pursuit. The Sea Nymph was positioned at a considerable distance, rendering it ineffective, while only the Henry was in range of the Royal James. For the next 5 or 6 hours, the combat remained at a stalemate, with all the players unable to move. Bonnet's men held the upper hand as the deck was inclined away from their adversaries, providing them with a little bit of protection. In contrast, the Henry's deck was slanted towards the pirates, leaving Rhett's men vulnerable to devastating musket fire. Bonnet's troops incurred 12 losses, resulting in the death of 10 and the injury of 14 members of Rhett's crew, which consisted of 70 individuals. The majority of Bonnet's troops engaged in combat with great enthusiasm, inviting their adversaries to engage in close-quarters combat and symbolically signaling for assistance by tying a knot in their flag. However, a few of the prisoners who were compelled to join the pirate crew declined to shoot at Rhett's men, and one narrowly avoided being killed by Bonnet himself during the chaos of battle. Well, ultimately, the outcome of the battle was determined when the increasing tide liberated Rhett's sloops, while briefly stranding the Royal James. As Henry approached Bonnet's ship, his men insisted that he surrender. Bonnet initially declined, asserting his intention to blow the entire ship up rather than submit to the demands. and issuing a warning to shoot anybody who attempted to get near him. Nevertheless, the crew managed to win Bonnet's allegiance, leading to the raising of a white flag. Following intense discussions, Bonnet ultimately acquiesced and surrendered without any conditions. Rhett arrived back in Charlestown on the 3rd of October, bringing with him his captives and the Royal James. Charlestown witnessed the isolation of Bonnet from the majority of his crew. He, together with his boatswain Pell and his sailing master Harriet, were detained for a duration of 3 weeks at the residence of Town Marshal Nathaniel Partridge. The remaining crew members were detained at the public watch house outside of Charlestown, as the town did not have a proper jail facility. On the 24th of October, Bonnet and Harriet managed to escape, likely through a collaboration with a local businessman, Richard Tuckerman. Johnson immediately offered a reward of £700 for capturing Bonnet and sent out search teams to locate him. Bonnet and Harriet, followed by a slave and a Native American inspiring to be pirates, procured a boat and headed towards the northern coast of Charlestown Harbor. However, adverse weather and insufficient provisions compelled the quartet to land on Sullivan's Island. Johnson dispatched a group of law enforcement officers led by Rhett to Sullivan's Island with the purpose of searching for Bonnet and bringing him back to justice. Of course, it was only a matter of time before they actually found him. And they did. And after a thorough investigation, gunfire was initiated, resulting in the demise of Harriet and injuries to Bonnet's other 2 accomplices. Eventually, Bonnet was forced to capitulate, and subsequently he was sent back to Charlestown, where he was incarcerated once more, but this time in a little bit more of a secure facility. During his pre-trial period, a civil uprising occurred in his favor within the city, which the authorities later characterized as a near destruction of the town and attempted coup of the government. Bonnet likely anticipated his execution in the Court of Guard, a guardhouse for the militia located in the city where the Exchange and Provost buildings have been situated as of 2007. Nicholas Trott, the Vice Admiralty judge, presided over the trial of Bonnet's crew and condemned the majority of them to be hanged on the 5th of November. Pell, on the other hand, provided testimony against his fellow pirates in exchange for leniency. The individuals were subjected to their capital punishment on the 8th of November. 2 days later, Bonnet was taken to trial before Trott and formally accused of committing 2 acts of piracy against the Francis and the Fortune. The commanders of these ships were present at the time to provide personal testimony against Bonnet, and that's some pretty damning evidence. I can only imagine when the captains entered the room, locked eyes with Bonnet. "Oh, I remember you." Awkward. Well, Bonnet entered a plea of not guilty for the offences, but he offered minimal defense for his behavior. It was more of a shrug of the shoulders. "I didn't do it. Just let me go," without really providing anything substantial. Well, on November 12th, Trott pronounced a death sentence for Bonnet, so it looks like that not guilty plea was unsuccessful. specifying once again that he would be executed by hanging. During his closing statement, Trott recounted Bonnet's misdeeds and implied that in the afterlife, Bonnet would suffer in a place described as the lake which burned with fire and brimstone, the second death. Well, Johnson issued a decree stating that Bonnet would be executed on the 10th of December. During the period of anticipation, Bonnet sent a letter to Johnson expressing extreme humility and pleading for mercy. He vowed to serve Johnson and his government in a lowly position if he was granted leniency. He dispatched multiple correspondences, one of which was addressed to Red, who extended an offer to transport Bonnet to England for a new trial contingent upon Johnson's approval. Well, the evident deterioration of Bonnet's mental faculties evoked sympathy from numerous residents of Carolina, particularly, and as the old sources go, the female population, who seemed to quite like Bonnet. Well, subsequently, London newspapers documented that the governor postponed his execution on 7 separate occasions. But Johnson did remain resolute, and Bonnet was executed at White Point, located in Charlestown. Following his demise, his remains were interred alongside his crew members in the adjacent wetlands below the level at which water typically recedes. The graves were unmarked. Well, that was the life of Stede Bonnet. The life and death, pretty fascinating. The rich boy who wanted to become a pirate. Kind of like Batman buying his superpowers, right? Well, our next pirate life is Edward Lowe. So let's begin. Edward Lowe, born in Westminster, London, around 1690. He was characterized as being unable to read or write, having a contentious disposition and consistently willing to lie and cheat others, behaving recklessly in the streets of his hometown. During his youth, he was reputed to be a skilled thief and gambler, and being quite friendly with the neighboring House of Commons servants, he would often engage in games of luck and gambling. The majority of his family members would seem to have been involved in criminal activities. During his youth, his brother Richard was physically undersized for his age and reportedly had to be transported in a basket on somebody else's back. In crowded places, Richard would mischievously grab the hats and wigs off people's heads who were passing by. Subsequently, Richard engaged in other illicit activities, and ultimately everybody had had enough of him, and he met his end by hanging at Tyburn in 1707 for the act of burglarizing a residence in Stepney. As he grew older, Lowe became weary of pickpocketing and thieving, and shifted his focus to burglary. Subsequently, he departed from England and embarked on a solitary journey to the New World in 1710. He resided in many places for a period of 3 to 4 years prior to establishing his permanent residence in Boston, Massachusetts. He wed Eliza Marble in the First Church of Boston on August the 12th, 1714, and they had a child, a little boy, but unfortunately he passed away in infancy. followed by the birth of a daughter called Elizabeth in the winter of 1719. Now Eliza unfortunately passed away shortly after childbirth, leaving Edward Lowe to care for their daughter. The demise of his wife had a significant impact upon him. During his subsequent career as a pirate, he frequently expressed remorse for abandoning his daughter and abstained from coercing married individuals into joining his ships. In addition, he would permit women to safely disembark at port. Initially employed as a rigger, he later became a member of a group of 12 individuals on a sloop bound for Honduras in 1722. Their objective was to acquire a cargo of logs to be sold in Boston. Lowe was hired as a supervisor, overseeing the loading and transportation of the logs. Upon his return to the ship, however, he experienced bouts of hunger, but the captain informed him that he simply would have to delay his lunch breaks. Now that's not very nice. Furthermore, the captain stated that he and his crew would have to be content with their allocated rations, which was simply not enough, especially the rum ration. I know stereotypes of pirates drinking rum, but some stereotypes are there for a reason. Well, Lowe found this to be unacceptable, and upon the failed negotiations with his boss, he seized a fully loaded musket and shot towards the commander, narrowly missing him, but tragically striking another unfortunate individual who was completely uninvolved in the throat. Well, after the unsuccessful revolt, Lowe and his companions were compelled to depart off the vessel. One day later, Lowe assumed leadership of the 12-member crew, which included Francis Farrington Spriggs, who eventually gained infamy as a pirate in his own regard. Spriggs seized control of a small sloop near the coast of Rhode Island. After killing a man during the theft, Lowe and his crew decided to become full-blown pirates, with the intention to make a black flag and declare war against all the world. Lowe, utilizing his recently acquired vessel, positioned himself in ambush along a well-traveled shipping pathway connecting Boston and New York. In a matter of days, he and his crew successfully captured a sloop from Rhode Island and looted it. In order to prevent the sloop from immediately returning to port and raising the alarm, his men deliberately ripped away the rigging. Subsequently, he seized several defenseless merchant ships in the vicinity of Port Rosemary. After this, Lowe traveled south and started operating in the waters of Grand Cayman, serving as lieutenant to the established pirate George Lowther. You see, Lowther was in command of the Happy Delivery, a 100-ton Rhode Island sloop armed with 8 cannons and 10 swivel guns. After being attacked by Indians, that is, Native American Indians rather, excuse the wording, Lowther and his crew relocated aboard a sloop called the Ranger. Lowther's company was continuously augmented by desperate seafarers eager to enlist with him. Rapidly developing into a preference for brutality, Lowe instructed Spriggs in a method of torture that entailed binding the hands of a victim with a rope threaded between their fingers and igniting it, causing the flesh to be consumed by fire until only the bones remained. Doesn't sound good. How low can you go? Well, after conducting many successful attacks, Lothar ultimately seized a substantial 6-gun brigantine called Rebecca on the 28th of May, 1722. He entrusted it to Lowe to serve as a captain. Lowe amicably terminated his partnership with Lothar, which had a crew of 44. Now out on his own, and during a significant raid in June of 1722, Lowe and his crew assaulted 13 fishing vessels from New England that were seeking refuge in Point Roseway, Shelburne, Nova Scotia. Despite being in the minority, Lowe raised his Jolly Roger black flag and proclaimed that the fishermen would receive no mercy if they resisted. Well, it seems to have worked. Lowe's men plundered every vessel in the fleet. Lowe selected the most sizable one of them, an 80-ton schooner, which he subsequently christened the Fancy. The ship was equipped with 10 cannons and served as his main ship. He deliberately caused the other ships in the fleet to sink and then left the Rebecca behind. Now, July 9th, 1722, the Boston Newsletter released a roster of those who were apprehended by Lowe. Several fishermen, including Philip Ashton, were compelled to join Lowe's crew. Ashton, however, managed to escape in the May of 1723 to Roatan Island in the Bay Islands of Honduras, and later he documented his experiences on Lowe's pirate vessel. Prior to Ashton's escape, he endured physical abuse, including beatings and whippings, as well as being restrained with chains. Additionally, he faced repeated threats of death, namely from John Russell, the quartermaster under Lowe's command. These mistreatments were a result of Ashton's refusal to sign Lowe's articles and join the ranks of the pirates. Lowe's tactics mostly involved raising deceptive flags and approaching ships unprepared. In the vicinity of St. John's, Newfoundland, Lowe erroneously identified a fully equipped warship as a fishing vessel and narrowly evaded capture. He proceeded to Conception Bay, seizing several vessels in the vicinity of the Grand Banks southeast of Newfoundland, prior to traversing the Atlantic Ocean towards the Azores. It was there that he seized a French pink ship, which is a slender stern-deck warship, which Lowe re-equipped and furbished as his new main vessel, designating it the Rose Pink. In addition, he seized an English ship that had 2 Portuguese passengers on board. Lowe instructed his team to raise and lower them repeatedly from the yardarm until they perished. He proceeded to the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, and subsequently returned to the coast of Brazil, where he was forced to retreat due to poor weather. Lowe relinquished his intentions of pillaging the prosperous maritime commerce along the Brazilian coast and redirected his focus towards the Caribbean. George Roberts, a crew member on the British vessel King Sagamore, described an encounter with Lowe on the ship called Rose Pink. Lowe's fleet captured Roberts' ship, and Roberts now referred to him as Commodore. That is a naval rank. Now, located approximately 220 kilometers to the east of Suriname, Lowe and his fleet, consisting of 2 ships named the Rose Pink and the Fancy, commanded by a young Charles Harris, halted their journey and anchored in order to clean the exterior and underside of the boats from substances such as seaweed and barnacles. The cleaning process, known as careening, was necessary, as, well, the pirates did not have access to a dry dock, where in ideal circumstances is where this process is performed. Well, due to his little experience, Lowe mistakenly deployed an excessive numbers of workers to the exterior of the boat for construction work, causing the rose pink to tilt excessively. The portholes were not closed, causing the vessel to fill with water and sink, resulting in the loss of 2 sailors. What a stupid mistake. Now, the Rose Pink had been responsible for transporting the majority of his supplies. Lowe was commanding a schooner named the Squirrel, which is a very threatening name for a pirate ship, of course, and his crew had to limit their consumption of fresh water to only about half a pint per person each day. It's not enough. Well, due to weak winds and powerful currents, Lowe's fleet, which had been reduced in number, was unable to reach their intended destination of Tobago. Instead, they managed to reach Grenada, an island that was under French ownership. By concealing the majority of his crew beneath the ship's deck, he was granted permission to dispatch a group of men to the shore in order to obtain water. On the same day, a French sloop was dispatched to conduct an inquiry, but it was apprehended when Lowe's crew members revealed themselves from concealment. After assuming control of the sea's sloop, which he called the Ranger, Lowe handed over the schooner Squirrel to his quartermaster Spriggs. Spriggs then renamed it to Delight, which is an equally threatening name for a pirate ship. You know, the 2 main ships that we think about when we think about pirates are that of Blackbeard, the Queen Anne's Revenge, and that of who we just spoke about in the first part of the video, Stede Bonnet and his ship, simply the Revenge. Usually British ships have much cooler names. You have like the Nemesis and things like that. Why would you miss the opportunity to give your ship a very threatening name? No one's going to get scared off by the Squirrel or the Delight. Well, maybe that's the point. You can sneak up on them. I don't know. Well, Lowe and a small crew departed in the middle of the night due to a disagreement with Spriggs on the punishment of one of the crew members. Well, Lowe's recently acquired fleet successfully seized numerous other sloops, among them one that Lowe decided to retain, christening it the Fortune. On July the 10th, 1723, during a trial involving several members of Lowe's crew, a sailor named John Welland, who was aboard the Fortune, testified that Lowe had plundered his boat, taking away money worth about £150, and subsequently assaulted him, even cutting his ear off with his cutlass. Subsequently, Lowe's navy successfully seized a Portuguese vessel named the Nostra Signora de Victoria on the 25th of January 1723. The captain of the Victoria deliberately discarded a bag containing around 11,000 gold moidores, which was valued about £15,000 at the time. Well, he'd rather throw it into the sea than allow it to be captured by the likes of Edward Lowe and his pirates. Perhaps it's still down there somewhere. Well, one of Lowe's most infamous acts of cruelty ensued because of this. In his fury, he cut off the lips of the Portuguese captain with a cutlass, grilled them, and then compelled the captain to eat his own lips while they were still scorching hot. Subsequently, he ruthlessly killed the rest of the crew. Lowe's subordinates characterized him as an individual displaying maniacal and brutal tendencies. Once again, how low can you go? There is one account that records an incident where Lowe set fire to a French kitchen, stating that the cook was an oily individual who would burn up quite nicely. Another narrative details how he single-handedly dispatched 53 Spanish prisoners himself using his cutlass. Now, it is believed that this was intentionally done in order to develop a fearsome reputation, and in terms of developing reputations, that's probably the most effective way of doing it. Well, you don't want to be on the pointy end of it, that's for sure. Lowe was a psychopath, engaging in acts of mutilation, disembowelment, decapitation, and slaughter throughout his life. Well, similar to other pirates during that era, Lowe attempted to instill fear in his targets by issuing threats of murder or torture in order to coerce their surrender. The crew of the ship being targeted impeded their officers from protecting her due to their intense fear of retaliation. During an unsuccessful torture session, one of Lowe's crew members inadvertently inflicted a cut on his mouth. Lowe was left scarred during a botched procedure. Well, a vessel known as the Unity was incorporated into the fleet and employed as a tender, but was subsequently forsaken during an altercation, with a warship dubbed the Mermaid. As Lowe's achievements grew in the Caribbean, his reputation also escalated. Subsequently, a reward was offered for his capture, prompting Lowe to embark on a journey to the Azores, once again joining forces with Charles Harris. As the pirates wreaked havoc, the authorities intensified their efforts to apprehend him. Despite the presence of numerous other pirate groups, the authorities specifically targeted Lowe. Thus, Lowe, Harris, and their vessels departed from the Azores en route to the Carolinas. On June the 10th, 1723, they experienced a decisive loss in conflict against the HMS Greyhound, a well-fortified warship. Greyhound was deployed under the leadership of Peter Solgaard, with the objective of pursuing and capturing Lowe and his fleet. But Lowe escaped on the Fancy, with a small crew and £150,000 worth of gold, sailing back to the Azores while leaving Harris and the Ranger behind. From the 10th of July to the 12th of July, a total of 25 crew members from the Ranger, including the ship's doctor, were subjected to trial. During this trial, Solgaard provided testimony and recounted the details of the combat. The individuals were executed by hanging for the crimes of felony, piracy, and robbery in close proximity to Newport, Rhode Island, on the 19th of July 1723. Harris was repatriated to England and subsequently executed by hanging at Execution Dock in Wapping. Upon Solgaard's arrival in New York, he was bestowed with the honor of receiving freedom in the city, as well as gold snuff boxes, in recognition of his contribution of apprehending certain members of Lowe's crew. Well, as for Low, while still commanding the Fancy, he navigated in a northerly direction. He apprehended a whaling ship located 80 miles away from the shore. In a state of anger after the confrontation with the Greyhound and the unfortunate death of Harris, he subjected the poor captain to torture before fatally shooting him in the head. He intentionally abandoned the crew of the whaler without any supplies, with the intention of causing them to die from starvation. But lucky for them, they successfully arrived at Nantucket, Massachusetts, following a admittedly challenging voyage. Continuing to stay along the coast of North America, the crew of Low's ship boarded a fishing boat in the vicinity of Block Island. Low executed the ship's captain and ordered the crew to disembark. After seizing 2 further fishing boats in the vicinity of Rhode Island, his behavior turned exceedingly brutal, prompting his crew to deny compliance with his instructions to inflict torment upon the fishermen. In late June of 1723, while heading south, Low successfully seized a 22-gun French ship and a sizable Virginian trade vessel named, once again, the very threatening, Merry Christmas. Oh, how sweet. Now, after being defeated by the Greyhound, Low exhibited a particularly vicious behavior towards his English victims. In July, his flotilla of 3 vessels reunited with George Lowther's soldiers. In the latter part of 1723, the fleet of Low and Lowther successfully seized control of the Delight vessel off the coast of Guinea. The Delight was equipped with 14 guns and commanded by Spriggs. After a span of 2 days, Spriggs and Lowther both deserted Low, leaving him with the Merry Christmas, which was now equipped with 34 cannons as his only remaining vessel. Now, there is a discrepancy in the accounts on the events surrounding Edward Low's death. In a general history of the pirates, Captain Charles Johnson, who some, by the way, believe to be Daniel Defoe writing under a false name, reported that Low and the Fancy were last seen in the vicinity of the Canaries and Guinea. Nevertheless, by the time the book was published in 1724, no additional reports had emerged. He observed a rumor suggesting that Low was traveling to Brazil, while another rumor claimed that Low's ship sank during a storm, resulting in the loss of all crew members. According to the National Maritime Museum in London, he managed to evade capture and ultimately settled in Brazil. According to Charles Elm's account in the Pirate's Own Book, Low was abandoned at sea without any supplies by the crew of the Merry Christmas. This mutiny was triggered by Low's act of killing a subordinate who was at the time sleeping after they had a rather fervent disagreement. The crew unanimously chose Captain Shipton instead to lead the Merry Christmas. They would then navigate the Caribbean waters alongside Spriggs. Low was, however, subsequently saved by a French vessel. Upon discovering his true identity, however, the French authorities promptly initiated legal proceedings against him, resulting in his execution by hanging in Martinique in 1724. That is according to Charles Elms. Well, in March of 1726, some 2 years after his purported execution, the crew of the HMS Diamond encountered a periagua carrying 9 individuals. One of them was identified as Low. Now, Diamond's canoe was unfortunately lost, which prevented them from pursuing Low. As a result, he was left to face his destiny in Roatan, where he allegedly met his demise at the hands of the local Mosquito people. In late 1739, a pirate named Ned Lowe, who was previously notorious for his acts of piracy, was observed fleeing from a Spanish fort in Portobello. During the War of Jenkins' era, he was part of the artillery teams defending the fort as the city was assaulted by British forces. Of course, a story for another video, that war. But what do you think happened to Edward Lowe? Which one do you think sounds most plausible? I'm not sure. It could really be any of them. But either way, certainly a fascinating and macabre figure. And so with that, allow me to thank my top-tier patrons and supporters on Patreon and memberships. There's Dark, Carey, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, and Christine. Thank you dearly for your contribution. And I will see you all in the next video. I hope you enjoyed it. More pirates to come. Good night, everyone.